Hello and welcome to Restoring Our American Republic. I'm Chuck Benoit with The Nature of Things, where we are realigning God, government, and natural law so that we might restore our American Republic. Please post your comments to be part of the narrative. So let's talk about interposition. Interposition is the action of a state or a local law enforcement official like a sheriff while exercising its sovereignty in rejecting a federal mandate that it believes to be unconstitutional or overreaching. Simply put, this means that a local government official like a sheriff is protecting the citizens in his county from an overreaching state or federal government official that is overstepping their jurisdictional boundaries. The sheriff interposes, puts himself in between the citizen and the state or federal government that is acting outside their legal authority, and he uses the protection of the U.S. Constitution. So we'll be getting into this and a few other things, but I would first like to welcome our guest this morning, Bill Mitchell. Bill, welcome this morning.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
Bill is the Florida State Director of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. And before we get too far into it, let's again bring Mike Levine in. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, gentlemen. Great to be here. Thanks.
Great. Well, I'm aware, I teach this Constitution class from the Institute on the Constitution, and we do bring up Sheriff Mack and his Constitutional Sheriff and Peace Officers Association in our constitutional lectures. When did you get involved, and where did you get started in the CSPOA, Bill?
Well, I first became aware of Sheriff Mack during the COVID crisis, because basically I wasn't necessarily a constitutional scholar at the time, but I went, something's terribly wrong with the Constitution here, and so with what's going on here, and I think that a lot of what's going on is unconstitutional. I mean, it actually started with me I was living in Arizona in Lake Havasu. And some friends of mine said, "Hey, Bill, how about you come down to the city council meeting? We're talking about the mask mandates and, not being able to go into Walmart and doing all these things. And we're trying to get the city council to do something about it." So I went, "Sure, I'll be happy to go as a show of support." I'm listening to people talk about, well, the masks are ineffective and this, that, or the other thing. And I went, wait a minute. The issue is constitutional. It's not a function of are they effective or not effective. It's a question of what's happened to our constitutional rights under all this. So when they asked at the end of the meeting, did anybody have anything else to say, I couldn't help myself. And I stood up and I said, listen, the issue here is constitutional. And if we can have cities and counties that are sanctuaries for illegal aliens, well, by God, we should have a city or county stand up and be a sanctuary for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, don't you think? Well, I got a lot of applause from the room and all that sort of thing. But I figured, well, next week we'll come back and the city council will be all ready to do something about this, right? And literally nothing happened. And I went, okay. So that was my beginning to draft what we called the Resolution 1776, which was essentially a resolution that basically protected people's constitutional rights at a county and city level. And Sheriff Mack got involved with that because he was part of the groups that were coming in and being a tremendous resource for us. Because one of the people that were part of what we call the Lake Havasu Patriots group that we formed, one of his key people in Arizona was on the group that we were involved with. And so that's how I got introduced to Sheriff Mack, and we started working with him back in 2019 and 2020.
So this ordinance 1776 ordinance, that was something out in Arizona?
Yes, it was. See, a number of counties all over the United States post-COVID passed some kind of resolution, declaration, proclamation saying that they were going to protect the Constitution, and they were following the same sort of thing that the Second Amendment folks had done, because again, 60% of the nation passed some sort of Second Amendment constitutional sanctuary county or state kind of resolution. all over the state. So that was what people thought they were supposed to do to protect their rights. But what they didn't know is a resolution is unenforceable. An ordinance is.
Right. So we have something going on here in Florida. It started in Collier County, which was a kind of a sanctuary city, or sanctuary county ordinance. Is that patterned after your 1776, or is that something a little different? Sanctuary
It's
county.
different.
Go ahead.
It's different from the standpoint of that it actually has penalties, both civil and criminal, for a violation of your constitutional rights. See, one of the things that we found out in Lake Havasu when we tried to hold people accountable for their violations of Title 18 and the Constitution is that we could not find anybody who thought they had jurisdiction to actually prosecute. So we went to the DA, we actually went to the assistant DA of the county first. They said, you know, I think you've got a really good case here against the mayor and city manager of Lake Havasu. Let me talk to my boss and see what we can do. Well, the next week we got a call back saying, golly gee, you know, this really isn't our jurisdiction. You're going to have to go to the state attorney general to do something. Well, when we went to the state attorney general, they said, you know, this isn't really a state issue either. This is a matter for the FBI. So we went, okay. So it was basically we were getting passed around, and nobody was going to take responsibility for the prosecution of anybody under the Constitution or the Title 18, which there were multiple violations of. So what we learned very quickly is that the sheriffs were willing to say, you know what, we're not going to enforce necessarily unconstitutional mandates, but we can't arrest people on that, because if we don't have a DA who's willing to prosecute and a judge who's willing to hear the case, then we've got no place to go with this. Why are we bothering? So that's the purpose of the ordinance, is to give local jurisdiction over these issues.
If you don't mind, Chuck, I'll pop in here.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically off camera, we were talking about the applicability, of a sanctuary of Bill of Rights sanctuary city or county or state, for crying out loud. And what you just said is actually the most important part of it, because jurisdiction is everything. And if, so anyway, I won't get into what I was thinking because I was going to drag some other stuff into this conversation right now. But the point is, and I'm glad you made the point, that when law enforcement and starts looking at this and they just realize that they don't have any local ordinances to rely on or to that empowers them to move against violators of our Bill of Rights, our rights under the Bill of Rights, then they're not going to prosecute. I mean, so that's the big deal here. This is why every city and every county in the United States, but let's start with Florida, needs to pass this ordinance so that we can enforce our constitutional rights here in our state, Bill.
Absolutely, I would agree with you. And Michael, the point that you're making there in terms of that every county in the state as well as the country should be doing this is well spoken, because we're supposed to have a bottom up, not a top down government. And unfortunately, over the last, I'd say, 150 years, the federalization of the states and the lack of sovereignty in the state and local level has been ignored or have been undermined in such a way that people don't realize that they do have local solutions to problems with constitutional issues. And that's the major focus of a lot of what we're doing, happens to be.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Are you familiar with the doctrine of the lesser magistrate?
Oh, absolutely. I harp on that all the time.
So, I mean, isn't it interesting that really effectively, based on the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, which says that government is the government closest to the people is the most enforceable. I mean, really, our cities and counties and our state should adopt all of our constitutional rights locally so that we can actually move against them. And then what I'm hearing you say is, like, for example, in Collier County, they actually tied specific penalties, just like we do in statewide legislation, the legislation stipulates exactly what the penalties would be if someone violates a particular statute or law. So it's interesting that Collier, it sounds like, went through and actually added on to the ordinance and included penalties for violations of certain laws that are covered under the Bill of Rights, and that's crucially important as well. Wouldn't you agree, Bill?
Oh, absolutely. The genius of the Collier County ordinance that they did, and this is something, by the way, it's the only one in the country that actually took the time to have a constitutional attorney draw it up to make sure that there was no violation of federal or state constitution in it. Because the key piece that people forget is when they start quoting the sovereignty issue or the supremacy clause of the Constitution, they forget the part that says pursuant to, because the federal government is supreme only when they act pursuant to the Constitution. And people forget that, because if a federal legislator legislates against the Constitution, that's null and void of law. It on its face cannot be enforced. However, if you don't hold people accountable for that, if you don't know your Constitution and you don't speak up about that, it stands. So that's why it's incredibly important that we know our Constitution, that we hold our people accountable, and that we have ways of enforcing it on a local level.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because Chuck, if Chuck could come back in, that'd be great. Chuck is a great teacher of the principle of nullification. When he does his constitutional class, he teaches nullification. So, I mean, you could get into the whole premise of whether any of these, you could say federal. It's easier to talk about federal in a lot of cases, but these, Florida is horrible too, right? I mean, the amount of rules that are written by administrative agencies that are technically unenforceable because the legislature is the only body empowered to make laws. Yet, we write a law and then we ask an administrative executive branch agency to write the rules to implement the law, but they don't have the authority to write laws. And that's a little bit broader than what we're talking about today with the Bill of Rights ordinance situation. But Chuck is just a great teacher on the principle of nullification. So maybe Chuck would give us a couple of words on that.
Unfortunately, nullification is one of those things that nobody wants to touch at all. Although Tennessee, a while back, maybe it's 2 years now, tried to pass a bill on trying to define how that state could affect federal overreach via nullification. It passed the House but didn't pass the Senate. So that kind of fell at its feet. But I was talking to Chris Ann Hall, who is a constitutional scholar, because I asked her, I said, well, why do we even need a law that allows us to nullify something that is not law? And she agreed that there was no need. But, I think one of the things that we're kind of fiddling around with is the whole idea of what's the stomach of the local county sheriff? Where are they in their willingness to even stand up? And the term today I used was interpose between us and an offending government agency, like what's happened recently. I'll just let it go there. What's the stomach? Who's willing to do that?
Well, I think that you're bringing up a really excellent question about not just sheriffs, but also just municipalities and police forces and things like that. Because what a lot of folks don't understand is that a municipality's police force is operating at the mayor's bequest. They're not necessarily operating constitutionally. They're operating according to whatever the mayor, who should be operating constitutionally, but they're operating under whatever guidelines he's giving the police chief and trying to have them enforced. The sheriff is supposed to be overseeing all this because he is the chief law enforcement agent in that county. And so if there's a violation at a local level, that should be taking place. Or if there's a violation at the federal level, he should be bringing that to the attention of the county commission, who should be addressing that via their oath to protect the citizens against that type of overreach. If you're dealing from the lesser magistrate's point of view, that the city is there to protect the people from the county is there to protect people from the state is there to protect people from the federal government, and so on. The federal government is supposed to be protecting us from, enemies from without, essentially. So when you're looking at that process, and when you're looking at that whole issue, like what's the sheriff's willingness to be involved in doing his job? Well, the different things that come to bear are how much have they been federalized? And what do I mean by federalized? How much money are they taking from the federal government, or how much are they receiving from the federal government that's to help ensure their cooperation with the federal government's actions? Because literally, the sheriff can interpose between federal actions. Like a very interesting one that would have been is, okay, people are coming into your county to take your J6ers out and they don't have the proper extradition orders. Your sheriff should be saying, excuse me, you're not taking anybody out of my county until you present me with the proper paperwork to do so, right? But if you've got all this money that's coming in from the federal government, and you've got this kind of a friendly relationship going back and forth, you maybe don't necessarily ask them about their extradition orders, and you don't necessarily make sure all that's in place. And you might even go out and help them take the J6er out of your county, not thinking about the fact that what you've just done was a violation of the constitutional rights of that individual.
Chuck?
Yeah, absolutely. So, COVID was a big issue that affected our constitutional rights on many, many levels. But what other kind of thing, what other kind of thing that would happen that would actually need the local government to protect us from? What kind of a thing? Is it basically any? Are we dealing with federal agencies only that could attack our Constitution, or can that be done even locally at the state level?
Absolutely, it can be done at a state or federal level, either one. It can also be done at a local level. Most frequently will do things unconstitutionally at a local level. But to give an example of various things that have happened, the federal government, when they were requiring, the mask mandates and vaccines for people that are being employed during COVID and all that sort of thing, Collier County basically took their ordinance, and they basically, based on their Bill of Rights ordinance, they created another ordinance called the Healthcare Freedom Ordinance that said basically that the things that the federal government was requiring weren't going to fly in their county. And what they did is they put a year in jail and a $20,000 fine going towards employers who were trying to say that they had to have their people vaxxed and they had to have their people wear masks and all the different things that they were trying to do. And that was in response to the fact that the federal government was saying that they were going to fine people $5,000 if they didn't do what they were asking them to do. Well, when the local government said you've got a $20,000 fine coming if you do obey the federal government on this unconstitutional issue, people kind of weighed that and said, you know what, I think we're going to go with the $5,000 fine and wait it out and see if that doesn't get overturned, because the $20,000 fine is a much bigger financial liability. So that was one of the ways that they effectively intervened into a federal situation.
So just to reiterate a point, it sounds to me like, Bill, certainly in our counties, we need to have laws that support every single one of our constitutional rights, because otherwise, as you pointed out earlier, the cities and counties won't have any jurisdiction in order to intervene when our constitutional rights are violated. I think that's a really important point that has to come out of this live stream. People need to walk away understanding that if we have a problem with our constitutional rights in any city or county, and then the local authorities are saying that because this is a federal issue, that it has to be enforced in federal courts, that means that those infractions on our rights don't get enforced. Correct, Bill?
That's correct. And so what we're looking at here is being able to do the same thing that the federal government is sort of doing to us, which is to say, golly gee, if you don't like what we're doing on the federal level, sue us. We're now saying, well, if you don't like what we've done constitutionally at the local level, sue us, because we'll be happy to take this to court, but we are going to interpose because we have this ordinance in place and we can therefore do so. And by the way, the ordinance is the beginning point, not the end point, because just as Collier County found that they had to go and sort of uh, enumerate what exactly was going to be constituting the violations that were going on with the things that the federal government was trying to do, having people be vaxxed and mandating masks and doing all these different things. Even though they had the ordinance place, they had to say, okay, specifically, let's talk about what are the penalties going to be in this particular area under this area of the Constitution, and how are we going to apply that, and what kind of penalties are we going to put in place for that? So
So if
it's
you don't mind, Chuck, Bill,
sure.
so that's a lot of legislative work to create ordinances that address the various different reoccurring infractions on our rights, right? That's a ton of work for cities and counties to actually put these laws on the books, correct?
Well, once you've got the basic platform in place, then it's just simply a function of designing specific, because there's certain, it's almost, you could almost use a template for it, because all you're going to be doing is describing the particular infraction that and what constitutional amendment is this violating, and what are the penalties, and what are the specific applications or specific things that constitute that. And so it's pretty much boilerplate. You can be done very easily and
Yeah,
very
there you go.
quickly once a county commission was on board with it and said, we are going to monitor this and do this on an ongoing basis. And for instance, let's use Collier County as an example. They haven't had to do anything other than the healthcare ordinance as an additional ordinance, because for the most part, nothing else has come their way that they've had to enforce.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Yeah, it's very interesting. So, Chuck, if you don't mind, we'll just delve a little bit into what's going on with the state mandating land uses in cities and counties. And I just was wondering if Bill had some insight as to the constitutionality of all that, and where he thinks that would, how the ordinance associated with the CSPOA would play into what's going on in the state of Florida as it relates to land use, Bill.
Again, and I'll go back to the Collier County model, because Chris Hall, who's the commissioner who pushed this, he's probably the leading expert on how do you apply this ordinance to specific situations. He is marvelous. He's a great resource, and he's very open to having people call him and say, hey, if we have this ordinance in place, how do we do this? But specifically, he and I talked about, like, okay, let's talk about the whole home rule violations of the things like live local acts, and people where they're trying to say, well, the state or the federal government's going to tell you how you're going to have to zone your land, and regardless of whether you think you need agricultural land or you don't want to have to disrupt that, we're going to tell you that you have to have high density, low cost housing zoning, because we as the state or federal government think it should be so. So it's obviously in violation of the county's home rule. So in that particular situation, you would then draft another ordinance if you needed to. You could just simply go to the folks that are trying to push that and say, look, we've got constitutional issues here. We'll see in court. But we're going to put up injunctions against any type of authorization on any kind of zoning changes until such time as this has been decided by the Supreme Court. So that puts a
Right.
huge wrench into a developer's thinking, oh, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to develop this land, and it's just going to be a quick deal. Because a Supreme Court case could take several years, if not, multiple counts of years to go through the court system. And most developers are not wanting to engage in development that is going to be litigated. And they're not going to know if or when they're actually ever going to be able to develop that land.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, Bill. So, my takeaway from what we're talking about today is this is, you can, every situation that we face in our lives, you can take a look at it as whether it's detrimental or beneficial, right? So here we are, we're in a situation where over the last many decades, we basically folded after we started, well, again, I think in 1913 when they passed the constitutional right for the federal government to tax us. That's kind of where the whole ball began rolling downhill. But today, basically what we're facing, because we're facing these just horrendous violations of our constitutional rights, it gives us an opportunity to think locally so that we can have a discussion locally about the application of the federal constitution on our rights. And it gives us an opportunity to restructure our local government in a way that actually reestablishes the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, which basically balances the scales back to where local rule supersedes state and federal rule. Bill or Chuck, whoever would like to chime in. Chuck, you want to weigh in on this real quick?
Well, I think you did a fine job of all that. We are kind of coming to the last few minutes. I just wanted to maybe just mention, I would assume that most of our audience is aware of the fact that what we're talking about when we talk about the Bill of the Rights is the first 10 amendments to our Constitution. And that swallows up the Second Amendment, and there's several counties out there that really stand very, very strongly for the Second Amendment. But most of the attack on our freedoms come actually from the First Amendment, and I would say freedom of religion. Now, freedom of religion isn't exactly what most people think it is. But you could say basically the freedom to believe what you believe. And in order to believe what you believe, you also have the right to act on that. And because the federal government has attacked the freedom of religion, all of these other amendments, all of these other freedoms have fallen into, or have become targets, if you will. So I would just suggest very, very briefly that we pay a little bit of attention to what it is we believe as individuals, and that may begin to help our nation change its course as to what it collectively believes. And then again, these last few minutes, what would a local citizen, how could just a local person like me walking down the street, how can we get out there and actually do something about bringing this kind of an ordinance to our county commissioners? Is there a starting spot?
Chuck, that's an excellent question, and that's one that is very near and dear to my heart because we are constantly looking for people in various counties that we're not already have a presence in to find an individual who's willing to, at that county level, be the person who spearheads the group that's going to form. What we usually say to somebody who calls and says, hey, listen, I'd really like to get involved and get something like this done. We say, hey, listen, great. Are you willing to be that person who's going to organize this? Because if you are, hopefully you've got two friends that'll help you. And that gives you the basis to begin to do the things that we have outlined as the process of how do you get the ordinance passed. You have the benefit of my 5 years of experience of putting these things together, figuring out whether you're on a fast track, whether you're going to have to build a base, or whether you're going to be able, or you're actually in a place where the deck is stacked completely against you. And so that's going to be a very long-term project in getting this in place. So those are the types of things that when an individual calls me, I start at that point to see, are they willing to be involved and at what level, and start to get them the information. Because again, I'm available to help mentor and do the things that it takes to get it done. Rick Carlin is one of those folks that are there in Lake County who contacted me, was interested in doing that, and has been very instrumental in helping Lake County develop that.
Super. Glad to hear that. And we're trying to keep your email scrolling through the bottom there. You have no problem with people sending you an email and getting whatever information they can to kind of get started. And you also have the website cspoa.org. Would there be one final thing you'd like to share with our audience before we shut our little live stream down, Bill?
The only thing that I would share is that if you are unhappy with the way things are, you can't continue to do what you've always done. If we don't get involved, if we don't start actively holding our elected officials accountable for the Constitution, we will lose our constitutional republic. We are already a long ways down that road, and I really am committed to making sure that we start coming back and that we make our abilities to enforce the Constitution local, because that's really where we have the best chance to make a difference right now.
And Mike, would you like to have any final remarks to our show today?
Yeah, I just think that I just really want to thank Bill for coming on today because I was familiar with pretty much everything that we've covered here today before because of the great job that Rick Carlins has done bringing the CSPOA to Lake County. But it does really heighten my understanding of the importance and gives us a methodology by which we can reverse the pendulum on federal and state. Again, based on the land use thing we're going on statewide, it's just obvious that our state government and our federal government, I used to be very concerned about, protecting the sovereignty of the state of Florida from the federal government. Well, today I'm really concerned about protecting the sovereignty of our county against the state, as the state tries to pour concrete all over our beautiful state and put cheap, ugly, destructive, high-density multifamily apartment complexes everywhere in the state of Florida and just absolutely ruin it. And I just find that to be repulsive. So, that anyone would want that on their resume, that they signed legislation into law that allows for the urbanization of the entire state of Florida. Anybody that would want that on their resume, I think is just not, either they are evil people or they're not thinking clearly about what they're actually doing. So my point would be that reversing the momentum, instead of having them impose on us, we start blocking, legally, legislatively, exercising our rights and our, to defend ourselves against particular state and federal government. And this CSPOA organization and the ordinance that Chris Hall has ushered through the Collier County Commission gives us the tools to actually do that. And that today's live stream has really heightened my passion for this movement. So I'll turn it over to you, Chuck.
Oh, great. Thank you for your remarks. And Bill Mitchell, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you all again for tuning in to our twice weekly live stream. Please follow us on Facebook at Restoring Our American Republic, or check us out on YouTube at Restoring Our American Republic -ROAR. Please like and share the program. And remember, if you're unwilling to govern yourself, you will be governed by tyrants. See you next time, and meanwhile, God bless you, God bless President Donald J. Trump, and God bless America.